All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the December 20th meeting of the Albany 4th District Commission. My name is Georgette Stuffins, and I'm chair of the commission. We'll go around the room and introduce ourselves. Can you explain?
Noel Pitch, Commissioner.
Joe Coffey, Commissioner. Don Ray Tagliano, Commissioner.
Richard Hendrick, General Manager.
Eric Smith, Director of Internal Controls and Enterprise Analysis.
Tony Vassell, Business Development and Marketing Manager.
Annette Gasper, Port of Albany. Megan Daly, Economic Development and Procurement.
Patrick Jordan, General Counsel.
David Williams, Director of Security.
All right. So thank you, everyone. In your packet, ahead of time, you will receive a copy of the November 15 minutes. Are there any changes or edits? If there are none, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
So, at our last month's governance meeting, governance committee meeting, we made a recommendation for the positions, the committee membership for 2018. So for governance, we had Dominic as chair, Noel, and then our vacant position as well as myself as ex officio. Finance committee, we had Joe Coffey as chair, Noel as a member in the vacant position, and then myself as ex officio, and then audit, we had Noel as chair, Dominic as a member of the vacant position, and then myself as ex officio. And so that is something that we do need to approve as a commission, and so you have before you resolution 22-2017.
I'll move it.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. At this point, I'll turn it over to Rich for some construction updates.
Thank you. The warehouse construction is moving along well. At the north end, they have most of the excavation for the footings completed, and we'll begin pouring concrete tomorrow. We expect to pour about 50 or 60, a couple hundred yards of concrete on that facility in the next week or so. Friday, we're intending to pour concrete at the dock of several hundred yards down there, which will then begin to bring both projects out of the ground. The dock work is going to shut down for the month of January, just with all major work. They'll have a skeleton crew that's doing some daily work down there, and then getting right back into it in the springtime. We're still waiting and working with the engineer on that project down there as to what we've been talking about with Ardent Mills and Cargill on any changes to the eco loader system and the proposed unloading system for ships and barges at that facility. We've met a few times with management of Ardent Mills to try and come up with exactly what their proposals are going to be so that we can include them into a new proposed lease for long-term use of the facilities down there. The warehouse, there was a tentative date of early February for substantial completion. We are probably going to miss that by a little bit, but as we're going, Pat is meeting with both the engineers and the contractors to see if we can keep that target date in line. We have been chosen as one of 3 ports in the country that MARAD, the Maritime Administration, have offered cybersecurity assessments to. Megan and I had a phone conversation just to kick it off last week with with the company that's doing it. They're going to be at the port the week of January 8th, kicking it off the 9th, 10th, and the 11th. What they've asked is that key personnel, Eric, Dave, Tom McGinnis, I've volunteered Commissioner Coffey to attend the meeting on the 9th, and then we've rearranged the schedule. We felt there was a lot of stuff that in your professional career and your work at the port, we've moved that to the first module of the cybersecurity assessment, but it's a lot to do with infrastructure and that. But what they've said is that they'll want me there for the opening of the week, but then get out because they want to talk to the people, and they found that when they've done this, that people have a tendency to talk more freely if management is not with them. So it's exciting that we were, they said, one of 3 ports in the country that were chosen for this. We jumped on the opportunity. We could have told them, no, we don't want it, but we'll never do that.
Is there a cost to it?
No cost. And
And you said the results are anonymous to Marriott too.
yes. Yeah, if they find there's a deficiency, it's not being broadcasted. They'll guide us on how to clear up the deficiency,
And that will
which
have
is,
the assessment, the end of that time, before they walk out the door. We have the assessment.
You get the
Yeah.
yeah. And that, 3 days, it'll be kind of packed time for 12 modules.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they did agree, because we said that's a lot of time for a small team,
Yeah.
and they did agree that we could probably compress it.
We also have been working with the New York State Office of Information Technology, and they came down the other day and are also offering us a cybersecurity assessment. Having these is going to greatly enhance our abilities to get federal grants for port security, and that is we need that cyber element of any grant application. The meeting we had the other day was kind of eye-opening as to the capabilities of the people that are up at the OGS office there. That we're going to continue with that, and but the team that came down from there was way above my level in cyber abilities. So we're going to be attending a workshop at the OGS facility January 4th, and we'll be working to enhance our security on all our cyber aspects. That's about it. We still don't have anything to report on the DEC negotiations for the new lease. We're continuing as is and working towards some kind of resolution, hopefully in the near future.
Any other questions for Rich?
Rich, what's the status of our site cleanup with EPA?
I'm sorry.
EPA was reviewing the cleanup standards, is that closed?
For 700?
Yeah.
Actually spoke with Cobb Harbor 3 times in the last 2 weeks. EPA not unofficially rejected the path that Cobb Harbor and John Protera wanted to take, and they actually determined that for what we want to do and where we are, we instead of going down to 10 ppm, we only have to go to 25, and they're asking for instead of a risk-based cleanup, a term, but, a different way to clean it, a different plan, which was actually supposed to be submitted to me today. And then the EPA said that they would have a quick turnaround on that type of plan. But they got a glimpse of the plan that Clough Harbor wanted to submit, and they said, we're not in favor of this, and it'll be rejected, so.
So they're gonna approve a less active cleanup?
Correct. Yeah, it was kind of a shock to me. It's just how they were reading their own regs. They're inclined to, anything above 25 still has to be carved away, but they, at this point, would rather have an on-site firm that I told Clough Harbor it would only work when they submit the plans to us. It's a small area that can be regraded and moved around. But it was a difference of the two different ways that we were looking at it. Was a difference of, I want to say, 250 to 300 tons of less soil coming off site. I can only relay what Clough Harbor's telling me by their discussions.
I'm just wondering if that has any consequences downstream for people, tenants who may want to use the site, recognizing that the cleanup standards are not as rigorous as what they've been initially
Yeah,
suggested.
that was my question. They said the EPA, response to them is that it still meets all cleanup levels for high occupancy down the road. And I can have Seth Fowler maybe come into a meeting if you want, or when they're done, I'd asked him for a more detailed report that we can give, which I was hoping to be done this week. So.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Movement on the road four side,
Did we get the report from Steve? I didn't see one this morning,
I think,
Not yet, but is that what you meant?
no, I think Georgette was talking about Spartan.
Yeah, the.
Oh, all right, yeah, we
Yeah.
spoke with,
Yesterday.
Jeffrey Mathers Monday. We're sending him a draft lease this week, and, he said that he would, turn around. He was actually in town on Monday. He would turn around. He wants to get going as soon as possible. He expects to, start in the springtime rather than the winter months. But it was all, positive the other day.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, so then we'll turn you over to Tony to talk about how the last month and the year is shaping out.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson Stevens. If you would, please turn to your ships, barges, and tonnage longshore report in your folder. And we had for comparing November 16, 17, we had a strong first quarter in 17, had a strong second quarter. Third quarter was satisfactory. Now you go back last year, fourth quarter, 2016, it was strong. This quarter was not. It was rather slow. And if you look at the two graphs at the top of the page, left outbound, right inbound, there were a total of 10 ships and barges last November and 2 this November, a reduction of 8. And that's reflected down in the next chart, the year-to-date. Last year, 69 ships and barges. This year, 57, reduction of 12. Our heavy lift project cargo market sector between ships and barges is down 7. The grain is down 6, and that will continue in that same direction. Molasses fertilizer down 2, so that's around 15. Wind brought us a plus with 4. So We are experiencing a rather slow fourth quarter, and in December, we only anticipate 3 vessels, which would put us at 60 versus 77 the previous year. Now, part of that is due to the fact, I think I mentioned last month at the board meeting, that 3 projects had been not canceled, but moved into 2018. So, can't really judge exactly how many vessels we might have been shifted there. But there was a vessel for the Norte project in Chihuahua, Mexico, that normally would have had 3 ships come in for it. But they consolidated everything into one vessel, which turned out to be great for longshore hours and a lot of terminal, but we lost 2 ticks in the count. So that's what it looks like for 17. I'll cover 18 a little later. Any questions on that page? Then tonnage report monthly, with 2 charts on the top. You go down to the one in the center, November 16-17 comparison. 642 last November, and 28-24, down 72,000. And good part of that was in the grain, 56,000 tons, also down scrap iron, 8,000. So between those two, that accounts for about 65,000 of the 72,000 reduction. And like I mentioned already, the grain will not be returning for some time. Any questions on November month? And we go to tonnage report year to date. And you look down in the center, the year to date totals 400,829 versus 238 or 239. On the plus side, from a tonnage standpoint, the project cargo sector is up around 15,000. That's a plus. The grain is down 169,000 overall, which basically is more than the monthly shortfall. Molasses fertilizer down 13, scrap iron down. And so what we have, the commodity and bulk sectors, the scrap iron, well, that's break bulk, the bulk, the molasses and fertilizer and grain account for the major reductions. Good news, project we've been looking at for about 4 years now, Cricket Valley. We went down to Dover Plains, New York for a couple of public meetings. We were just notified the first ship coming in for Cricket Valley will be a vessel on February the 5th next year with around 77 pieces of structural steel, and that will be discharged on the Albany side. The rest of the project will be the heat recovery steam generating units will be discharged on the Rensselaer side. We don't have an indication of when that will be on the Rensselaer side, the discharge. Looking at 2018, the first and second quarter look fairly strong. The third quarter looks a little bit quiet. Fourth quarter looks, there are a number of projects towards the end of the year, if they aren't shifted like they were this year. Doesn't look too bad next year.
So are you projecting, you think, sort of similar to where we
Well,
were in 17? Or
Well, it just takes 77 last year, 60 this year, maybe next year 60 to 70. There's a wide range because of the commodity situation. Well, we're not going to have the, let's see, there were last year grain, I think there were 7. So we aren't going to have those repeating. So you take the 77 down to 70. So between 60 and 70.
The good news on that front, though, is that we have been having those meetings with the tenant that is taking the assignment of the lease of the grain company and does intend to, build infrastructure that will get that going again, perhaps in a different direction, but also could be even larger.
A good point, though. They'll be switching from exporting grain to importing. At the present time, Argentina and Brazil control or handle about 70% of the worldwide grain market. So that's what would be anticipated grain coming in from South America. anywhere, prediction, I've heard from 1 to 2 years before something like that takes place before one.
I did hear, good number of ships though, so that's
Yeah.
good. Good news.
And lastly, the longshore hours. The chart on the left, we're at almost 60,000 hours versus 38, up around 22,000 hours at 57%. A lot of terminal work. And if you look at the right, we're at like almost 60,000 and over 35% for the total last year. And there have been 12 months out of the 47 reported here that we've gone over 6,000 longshore hours. And so 12 out of the 47, we've hit that, and it's a positive thing, needless to say.
Yeah, that's the good news, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not as many ships, but more people
Right.
working.
More
Right.
people working, because that last ship, as I mentioned, the BBC Aquamarine was the Mexico project. It produced probably 80 to 90% of the 6,000 hours that were earned in November. Any questions?
So it's a perfect segue into our financial conversations, based on where we're gonna end by the
Sure.
number of ships and stuff, so I'll turn it over to Eric.
Sure, so, the projection has not changed materially since we last looked at this. The primary drivers of the favorable budget components, specifically within the revenue categories, occurred earlier in the year, which is consistent with what Tony just said related to maritime activity. I'll note that there's a salary projection on here that is not correct. I've reduced the projected variance to approximately $91,000, and that variance is driven by expenses that have corresponding revenue offsets. As an example, you'll see in the miscellaneous line, there's miscellaneous revenue of $32,600. There's a corresponding expense line within the salary category for that amount.
With security and stuff.
Not that particular item, that's related to a insurance proceeds on a topic that had been covered previously in the year. But yes, the other drivers of the variance are security, salaries, overtime pay, but those are all either billed to customers or billed to FMT. So taking that change I just described into an account, we're still looking favorable as compared to the budget. For the most part, we will see a contracted increase in that position of about $6.8 million, which is not surprising based on the timing of the construction projects that Rich described earlier. So our net position is primarily composed of our fixed asset portfolio. So as we've seen the projects go forward, as we've recognized grant revenue, that has driven that net position to where it's projected to be. As we discussed in the audit committee meeting, there are still some non-cash year-end required entries that will impact this projection. They're both actuarial driven, and we do not yet have the actuarial analysis to make those entries yet. Just briefly, and this is an example I pulled out just to give a sense for the outperformance relative to budget on the maritime revenue categories. So already in November, we've exceeded the number of heavy lift ship and barges that were budgeted. It was budgeted at 35. I think we're at 37 now. Typically, for example, for dockage, a heavy lift ship will generate anywhere between $3,000 and $4,000. They're they're smaller vessels, have a shorter duration of stay than some of the other commodity categories. An interesting thing that has occurred in 17 is we've had, on a handful of occasions, ships come and discharge other heavy lift items. So whether it's steel or whether it's items other than the typical GE cargo, and those have driven both the duration of stay longer and have required larger vessels. So there's a couple of things going on there. You know, we performed favorably to budget in terms of the number of vessels, but also the composition of those vessels have been such that they've generated greater revenue. As an example, the ship that Tony just mentioned, the Aquamarine, you know, we've recorded about $15,000 or $16,000 of dockage revenue for that ship. So that's about, you know, 4 or 5x what we would typically see, and that kind of flows through those maritime revenue categories.
And so, based on how we're wrapping up this year and Tony's comments about projecting for 18, you still feel good and comfortable with our 18 budget that we
I off the top of my head, I don't recall the number of vessels we projected, but they're below, I believe they're below what Tony just indicated he expected them to be. So we'll, as soon as we start projecting our 18 activity, we'll be able to reflect those assumptions.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for you? No. Okay. Is there any other business? So I believe we are going to enter executive session. Okay. For the purposes of...
Acquisition, sale, lease of real property.
Okay. For the purpose of acquisition, sale, or lease of real property, or proposed acquisition of securities, or sale, or exchange of securities held by a public body. So I'll take a motion to enter executive session.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. So just to note, there was no action that was taken in executive session. And the only other item we have is in your packet are our meeting dates for 2018. Our next board meeting is January 24th at 12:30. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Second? All in favor? Aye.